Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Teacher Talks at Europass with Susan Cagliano. And this week, I am very happy to interview a colleague of mine who who has dedicated his entire career to IT, education, music, as well as he is now the director of the Europass Teacher Academy in Malta. And he is an entrepreneur who is, his focus is on pedagogies for digital tools. He does lots of things that he is an absolute wealth of knowledge, information, and great ideas. And so before I bring him on, I would like to just sort of introduce this topic because when we think about teaching, it's like if teaching is kind of like, I don't know, like navigating a ship. And then we have this online world that's like, it's like we're going through this area that's full of icebergs, okay? And we can see the tip, but there's a whole lot happening underneath. And this is why today I wanted to have Klaus Conrad come and talk to us, because sometimes we are steering this ship blindfolded without realizing it. So Klaus is now going to help us see some of the dangers and just be a bit smarter with our cybersecurity in schools. The risks that we might be incurring without even realizing it, and how teachers can stay safe and connected. So I would like to now bring on Klaus and welcome him to Europass Teacher Talks. Klaus, thank you so much for being here with me.
Pleasure being here, Susan.
And you and I had a conversation last week that was, I realized in the end that I have a certain degree of knowledge, but boy, is there a lot about this topic. And the title of this is Sharing, Truly Caring, and Thinking about the Cybersecurity Safeguards in Schools.
Yeah.
And I wanted to start this off by just asking you if there was one thing about data privacy that you wish that like teachers knew, okay? One particular thing just to start off this conversation. What do you wish they all knew?
I think if teachers understood that the value of data doesn't depend on their perception of the value, but data value is determined by the people who might be using it for or against you, I think that realization could be enough to shift people's mentalities, because I think there's too little awareness of what data actually is and how valuable certain data could be to people that you have not, you might never consider that like a photo to be data, or a snapshot of a student or whatever to have any value to yourself. So you think that that data is valueless or has no value, but to other people in other fields, that can be very valuable data, and it could lead to outcomes because you've shared that data, for example, without proper thought, that might not turn out the way you intended. So I think the understanding of how valuable data can be, especially in today's AI-driven world.
Aha. So could you give me an example of, what could be something, what are some examples that you've seen of where a teacher might have just shared something that was not very valuable data to he or she, but then you might know of some not so pleasant outcomes?
Sure. I mean, let's take a high-level view. So, for example, we've all heard about how AI systems are being trained nowadays by basically consuming lots of information. And there have been many questions about where does the data come from? Well, a lot of it comes from social media, for example, or stuff you put on the internet. So turn it around. Are you comfortable with an AI, for example, using images that you've posted? You might not have control over that, because once they're out there, and could be used to train, for example, AI image generators. So maybe an image comes out looking something like a student or like you know, and it's too late at that point, because once the data is out there, it's out there. Now, I mean, there are many other situations we could think of, like sharing personal details that you didn't really want to publicize to the world that come back to haunt you like years later. Okay, but it's basically down to whatever you put out there is out there, and we should always be thinking about who could potentially use that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you know,
And have you found the teachers who attend your courses in Malta, do you find that they are aware of this, or is this actually a big part of what you need to help them understand?
so without calling out any teachers, I do actually routinely ask them, like, do you know GDPR, for example? And then I tell them, like, this is the point where everybody puts up their hand and says, yes, of course we know GDPR. Yes, because that's the answer, right? That's what we should be answering. But then in real practical terms, like, what are the implications of GDPR, for example, in the EU? Like, what are you allowed and not allowed to do? There might be some superficial understanding. There might be some schools that have enforced it a little bit more than others. But at a personal level, there's very little real appreciation or understanding of why those laws exist and why they might be important. So the example I always give is, for example, if I look at schools here in Malta, I can still go to many social media pages of schools and see pictures, for example, posted of school events, of students, of underage kids, of primary school age kids.
Yes.
And whenever I see those things, I worry, because
You worry.
I worry a lot. Because there are some teachers who I know, for example, do smart things like blurring out faces and making sure that there are no personal details attached to photos. That's the right way of doing it. And yet, even after all of these years of GDPR being the law, we still see schools and we still see individual teachers sharing material that at best should be questionable. At worst, directly goes against GDPR regulations, because and also we see at the school level, there are certain things where, as we discussed when we first spoke, I mean, law is often down to interpretation. And I'm not a lawyer, so I want to be clear about this. But I have spoken to different lawyers about this. And for example, with GDPR specifically, there are certain provisions in the law that say, if you are going to share anything, especially if it is children's data, especially if it is underage, so it gets progressively more strict as you go down that list, right? So if you have, for example, underage kids and you record their voice, for example, that's like the highest level of no stuff, okay?
Okay. Wait, tell us
Right?
more. Tell us
So,
more.
so if you go beyond a certain point, sort of, it should be practically automatically not allowed to post certain things, because there are so many restrictions in the law. But I constantly see sort of things that have me questioning whether the schools have really seriously considered the implications. So many schools, for example, hand out waivers at the beginning of the year. And
Yes.
they tell parents, sign this, and you're giving us blanket permission to post whatever we want, wherever we want, for as long as we want, and so on.
Many
Now,
schools.
yeah, many schools. Now, most companies would not be allowed to do that. Schools should definitely not be allowed to do that, because, I mean, one of the principles of GDPR is both informed consent. So basically, you are explaining not only that you are collecting the photos, but why you're collecting them, what the implications might be, which is something very few schools seem to do with parents. The second big problem is that one of the other provisions in law is that you need to be in control of what you post, and you need to be able to delete it. You need to be clear about for how long it will be online. You have to allow people the option to opt out, for example, for certain
Yes.
things. And I often see that schools tend to steamroll all over this, and as long as they have a piece of paper that says, oh, we're allowed to do whatever we want, that's it. They are compliant. But again, GDPR is not about being compliant. It exists because of the dangers of sharing data indiscriminately. So rather than just making it into a tick box exercise where everybody has to sign something, whether they understand it or not, we should really be thinking about how can we educate both ourselves and the stakeholders within our schools on why certain things might be useful to put online, but other things should not be put online. I'm not a big fan of social media, as you might have known from our last conversation. And when I saw the title of today's session, sharing truly caring, that would be probably if you truly care, less is more.
Aha.
Right? So this is the summary of today's meeting.
Exactly.
So less
is more when it comes to social media. And this is really this is such an important thing to talk about in the age of sharenting, right? Sharenting, the parents oversharing. And there are many parents who share, and they are even told, explicitly, even sometimes by their very own followers, saying, you sure you want to be sharing this? You should be very careful with sharing pictures of your kids doing all kinds of things. And the parents will say, there's going to be crazy people everywhere.
Yeah, but would you let crazy people into your house?
Exactly.
What's the point of a front door if you leave it wide open? And when you are posting stuff indiscriminately, you're not only opening the front door, you're basically handing it out to the crazy people. So why would you do that? Like if you really care about your kids, which most parents do, why would you put them in a potential risky situation by oversharing things that really are nobody's business? I mean, if I can put it this way, unfortunately, there's this obsession nowadays that to be seen, you have to live your life in the public sphere. Right? And we know that a lot of the stuff that gets posted online, especially by teenagers, for example, and young adults, a lot of it is just projection. It's not real. I mean, a couple of years ago, I remember being in the school and they had massive problems because some of the teenage girls would spend hours preparing to put a snapshot on Instagram, for example. And it was having huge effects on their well-being, on their mental health, and so on, because they felt this desperate need to project happiness and success and so on, when actually they weren't in that state of mind at all.
Of course.
But to the world, to the outside world, everything needs to look perfect. So parents sometimes can fall victim to the same thing, or they might feel that they are so proud of their children they just want to share everything.
And sometimes they monetize their children.
That is definitely something I would not be willing, a line personally I would not be willing to cross. But then again, I'm not here to impose a moral standpoint on this. But from a purely sort of practical perspective, if you as a parent want to share what's happening with your kids, of course you can do that. But just be aware, at the very least, that the information you put out there might not only go to the people that you think it might go on. Like if you want to ensure, for example, that it only goes to family and friends, there are other tools, not Facebook or not Twitter or not all of these social media platforms that are basically designed to be in a format where the product is you. I mean, that's what these platforms sell. The platforms don't sell anything, they sell your data, whatever it might be. And we know that companies like Facebook have said in the past, oh no, we don't sell your data. And then comes Cambridge Analytica and we know, actually, no, we do, And I'm very skeptical about all of these promises that the data is not being used externally or by other people, because this is how they make money. Facebook has nothing that makes money except the adverts that they target at you by basically analyzing you, your data, your connections, your networks, and reselling data about you to advertisers.
And so when we see, because this is a very popular thing for schools to have their own Instagram account, this is sometimes something that actually, they're showcasing a lot of the wonderful activities they're doing. And you're right that some of them, either they take pictures of the kids from the back, In Italy, really, it's a very strict thing where they put stickers on the kids' faces, and it looks a little funny, but that's there was a lot of care put into that. And I was wondering, yes, I mean, is this the kind of thing where you know in GDPR, okay, when you were talking about it's not just about being compliant, but it's about doing what is the right thing. But I mean, what kinds of what sorts of consequences can there be for schools that are not compliant?
So, I mean, that's an interesting one because consequences depend on enforcement. So, if you're in a country where GDPR is not enforced, or where maybe even the government itself is not particularly strong in following GDPR,
Right.
the answers are probably nothing. Okay? At a school level. But that doesn't mean that the individual data you post might not be misused. I
Right.
mean, the sad reality is that we live in a world where, especially now with AI, it's not only become possible, but it's become easy for images to be manipulated, for things to be misrepresented, for example, creating a virtual avatar can be done from a single photo. Okay, so if somebody wanted to take a screenshot of us here and make us say all sorts of silly things, they could probably do it from a single screenshot. Right? So putting ourselves out there, we're doing it for the benefit of teachers, but is actually quite risky nowadays, because you don't know how somebody might want to do that. But it's my decision. It's your decision. Like, we have autonomy and we have agency in deciding that. Children don't.
Right.
So what's the worst that could happen? So the absolute worst that could happen, and maybe we'll share that video that I sent you, I think that quite nicely encapsulates all the worst that could happen, is that, for example, images could be used and misused for all sorts of things. And I believe actually in Italy, for example, there was a case last year or the year before where some students in the school were creating pornographic videos, for example, using pictures that they took off social media of other students. Now, that is, of course, very extreme, but is a real possibility. It's one of the reasons why, for example, a lot of teachers used to protest very loudly about being recorded in school, in the class,
That's
because they
right.
didn't want their videos to be online.
Right.
So we cannot apply one standard to the adults and a totally different standard to the kids as well. At least we shouldn't, But sometimes it happens. Now, maybe if we go down the route of something less sensational, like pornographic videos or whatever, the absolute worst thing that could happen is that with too much data being out there, kids get profiled. What that means is you know who they are, you might know where they are, you might know when they are in certain places because you can establish a routine. If you post things like, for example, achievement scores,
Yeah.
okay, who knows who might get access to those things? I mean, one of the things that I show a lot here when we do, for example, AI courses is different systems from around the world. And one of them is from China. And in China, they're capturing attention data with one of their systems, which is basically how focused and attentive are students during lessons. And they send that data in real time, every few minutes, to the teacher and to the parents of all the students. So there's a WhatsApp group or there's a social media group with all the parents, and they can all follow every student's score. Now,
No.
all the teachers in class do exactly your face when they see that, right? Because they are all like thinking, oh, this is terrible, this is like only in China, and so on. But I'm not so sure that we are totally immune to these things. I mean, we should be, and the EU regulations and so on make it very difficult for companies to do anything like that, or for governments to do anything like that.
Uh-huh.
But it doesn't have to be quite so extreme for profiling to be still possible. And I've seen so many stupid things in the past few years when it comes to social media and data, like job interviews getting ruined because somebody finds some picture that you took when you were out with friends and did something stupid, and somebody, like, it was fun at the time, but
Exactly.
makes you appear like something you're totally not. But Didn't
Well,
have to be,
and
of course,
what
but
like what you think is funny when you're 15.
yeah, it's not funny later on.
And then I was also thinking about the fact that I mean, do you remember when Facebook first came out? And I mean, I can certainly remember back in
I'm old, I remember.
2009, back in the old days when I was very young, and I would absolutely broadcast everything. Because I really had this impression that I was talking to like a small group of people. I don't know what was going through my head. I couldn't wrap my head around it. And so all kinds of things about, here I am packing for my trip to the US. I'm leaving tomorrow. It's like, hello, if anyone wants to break into my home.
That's exactly it. Because what you think your broadcast is. Right.
It's just, yeah.
And it's especially nowadays, what people have to realize is that AI is basically really, really good at compiling and analyzing patterns of behavior, right? Because at the end of the day, what you post online, how often you post, the type of things you post, all of that can be used to build a picture of who you are, what you like, who your connections are, what type of things you are interested in. And we've seen the result of that, for example, in political elections, where people end up in an echo chamber just hearing the opinions that one party wants you to hear, and they address them in such a fact that it's hyper personalized. You feel like it's speaking directly to you, because guess what? It is specifically tailored for you. And it obscures basically the objective reality of what you should be considering, or the factors you should be thinking about. So when it comes to social media specifically, I think the greatest disservice it's done to the human race, so to speak, or to society, is the fact that it's been the death of objective truth and objective facts. Like everything is subjective. Like your opinion is your opinion, I have my opinion, and the truth or not of that thing is totally subjective. Now, living in a world like that is very difficult, especially for educators, because we base our authority, or our the fact that we can educate on certain values, certain morals, certain facts, certain truths that we believe to be a certain way. And if all of that is in question, if all of that is open to interpretation, if all of that is open to disagree, I mean, we can always disagree and discuss, but at some point there has to be at least some things that we all agree on, or some things that we accept to be true or not true. But with social media, what we're seeing is that a lot of people are starting to really morph into this mindset that everything is open to interpretation. And I mean, some things just cannot be open to interpretation. So I'm not, not to offend anybody who believes in this, but the earth is not flat. I'm very sorry to tell you, it is not. Okay, and if you believe that, if you really believe that, I don't know how I can communicate with you, because it simply is not. Right? And what I mean, I've seen many debates about this kind of thing between flat earthers, for example, and people who are not. And I always hear the same phrases. I did my own research. No, you didn't. That's not research. What you've done is you've latched onto somebody else's opinion that was ill-informed, wrong, just plain wrong. There's no maybe right or wrong.
It's a different perspective.
Yeah, but no, some things are not open to perspectives. Yeah. But unless we accept that, and unless we really push back on this, what happens is that our kids are also growing up in a world where everything is open to interpretation.
Yes.
Where everything is open to, that's your opinion, but it doesn't mean it's right. And how can you really function in a world like that? I mean, at least to me, it's very difficult to understand how we are going to move forward as a society if literally everything is like open to interpretation. I mean, we are seeing this play out right now in the world out there, right? If you look at what's happening, for example, in the US or in other countries, this constant sort of division of society into two camps, where you just cannot talk to each other because we're constantly fighting about really inane things. I mean, stupid things, right? But because we've opened the floodgates to, well, it could be that way. And there's two sides of every argument, and this, let's present both sides equally,
And it's
just doesn't work.
And all of this, and it's amazing too, something that before we went on, we were talking about the fact that that you and I, you are teaching the courses that are connected to IT, to AI, and then I teach the courses that are more connected to well-being. And you would think, and you can't believe how many things we have in common, you and me, and the kinds of things that we're talking about in class. Also, because what you're talking about with all of the fact that everything is open to interpretation, what happens is it just creates layer upon layer upon layer of, it's not even a layer, it's quicksand of uncertainty.
Security, because
security, uncertainty.
Where is your grounding?
And absolutely. And there was in the world of mental health and in well-being, they talk about there was a term that was coined during the end of the Cold War that was VUCA, VUCA, and VUCA stood for, it was a military term that was connected to a period of great volatility and uncertainty, and that was nothing compared to now. VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, and then the C was complexity and ambiguity.
Yes, so, I remember that from management schools as well. So in management schools, we use it to basically assess a environment.
Exactly.
And if there's too much volatility, uncertainty, complex, you could argue, for example, that's exactly what we're seeing right now on the stock market this week, right? The volatility index has gone through the roof. The fear index has gone through the roof. The uncertainty index has gone through the roof.
Yes.
Because nobody knows what's going to happen. Are the tariffs on? Are the tariffs off? Are we putting it on this product or that product? And in that environment, it leads to paralysis. It leads to fear and paralysis.
To paralysis, and then it leads to a lot of conflict, and also connected also to what you were talking about, where if nothing is really certain, nothing is really true, and where everyone's kind of just swimming around in this, and that uncertainty, it paralysis, and also a certain degree of, I would say, aggression on some level.
Why are there so many angry people in the world?
Exactly. And so, and in thinking then about, a teacher's responsibility, there's some people that say, at this point, privacy is dead, right? It's not. A lot of people have just thrown in the towel, and what can you do? Their parents are putting a lot of pictures on there anyway. The younger generation doesn't care. They're posting all of these things. But don't you think, what I'm getting from what you're saying is, as educators, the whole point is that we would raise these questions.
I would hope that as educators, we set a better example. Because I think, as we all know as educators as well, that students follow the examples that they see. So, one would hope that parents set a better example, but we cannot hold parents to the same standards we should hold ourselves as educators. Because as educators, we should have added responsibility, and we should set a better example, and then maybe through that entice parents and students to do better than they are doing now. Very often, we have to understand as well is that just as educators might not have the full background of what's happening with the data, with why there are risks and so on, parents definitely might also not have that information. And maybe if they did have a little bit more education, then they would think differently about this. So I sent you a video. I don't know if you will be sharing it with the teachers.
That is, you sent me the video the other day.
Yeah, the Ella video.
And
I find it. And normally the reaction from many parents after they have seen that video is shock and horror, and that's great, because that's exactly the kind of thing that we want them to experience. That's why it was made. And the fact that it was made by a telecoms company who basically are in the business of providing tools that allow you to interact with social media and so on. I think it's very telling, because if even they are not comfortable sort of or advising against just wholeheartedly just sharing all of these things, then we should basically do our best to amplify that message and to make everybody more aware of that. So I know that, for example, GDPR actually lays out that, for example, consent, like the type you put when you sign a waiver, has to be informed consent. So have schools informed parents? Are they making an informed decision? And I would bet that in most cases the answer is no. They just give them the form and sign it, and they assume that parents should know these things. That's a really big assumption, a really big assumption. And I think if you had to actually do a single session where you show them, for example, this particular video, you would probably find that many, many parents would not give their consent once they realize that this is so thing. And maybe that is also why schools don't do it, because it creates issues, right? Because then you have half the parents that don't want to give consent. So you would have to stay blocking out their kids, not take photos, all of this stuff.
Yes.
So it's difficult. But the fact that it's difficult doesn't mean it's wrong. In fact, maybe the fact that it's difficult is one indicator that it's worth doing, because most things that are worth doing are not easy to do. So, sorry, being philosophical here a little bit, but that's what I've always believed. If it's easy to do, there's no inherent value in it, because then everybody could do it. But
okay, so I'll see if I can share the screen. Okay, I will do my best. Let's see.
Yeah, we can always also share it with them later, but
I can do that even now. Okay, so you tell me. I am about to share it. And can you see it? Do you see it? Not yet?
Now I am seeing it. So it's
okay, so I will now, here we go.
Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. It's me, Ella. Well, a digital version of me. Just a bit older. Amazing what technology can do these days, isn't it? All you need are a couple of pictures, like the ones you share on social media, where they can be taken and used by everybody. I know, for you, these pictures are just memories, but for others, they are data. And for me, maybe the beginning of a horrible future. A future where my identity can be stolen just like that. Where I can go to prison for things that I would never do. Imagine my credit score being destroyed, Dad. Or my voice copied to scam you, Mom. Mom, I'm in trouble. I need you to send me money, please. I don't want to become a meme, humiliated by everyone at school.
Kill yourself, you fucking loser.
And I certainly don't want this.
I will. Okay.
Yeah,
so
it was buffering a little bit there. But
yes,
I think we can share the link and they can watch it. It's not whenever we show that video to teachers, the reaction in the room is always the same. It's extremely quiet at the end. Because I think the penny drops that, I wish I had known that before.
Yes.
And all of the things that I tried to sort of point out at the beginning, I think this video summarizes beautifully. And I'm actually very grateful to Deutsche Telekom for producing it, because it's such a great short message that really, I think, perfectly highlights a lot of the things that we should be aware of, the things that could be happening. And I cannot, I just say this. Everything you see in that video is not only possible, nowadays it's become easy. It is easy to clone a voice. It is easy to manipulate images. Anyone can do it. And because anyone can do it, somebody will do it, It's just a simple formula. If thing. And unfortunately, the people that will probably do those kind of things are not doing it because they have the benefit of your child at heart.
And so, okay, what kinds of suggestions would you make and do you make in your courses to, for example, for schools that would like to have some type of a digital presence, that would like to, let the community know the very interesting things they're doing? Sometimes it's also, it's a way of marketing their school. Occasionally it's also, they feel even through Erasmus, like that they have to show what it is that they are, using this funding for. So if you have some advice for these schools that maybe need to revamp the way they're using their websites, their social media, what would you suggest?
So of course there is always a need to communicate, and especially for schools that are privately funded or so on, rather than publicly funded, this is always a big thing. We have to be very careful that we don't cross the line between turning the students into a business asset. So that's an ethical problem there for schools to solve rather than a practical one. Because if you cross that line where you basically see smiling children as a way to attract more parents to send their kids to your school, then you've already crossed the line a little bit, right? But practical suggestions. So the first one is realize that there are multiple channels that you could use. Social media might not be the best one. So if you want to showcase what you are doing, think about the audience. For example, if you want to share information with parents at your school, but not prospective parents out there, right? Social media is not the way to do it. There are intranet systems that are shared only within the school, where only parents have access to it and only students have access to it. So, for example, if you are on a Microsoft system, for example, you would be able to use something like SharePoint, which is not publicly facing, but is internally facing. Now, the reason why a lot of schools don't go down that route is because it requires a little bit more setup and thinking and thought on how you will administer it for parents. But again, just because it's difficult doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that if you take it seriously, you need to invest some time and resources into making it right. There are other ways as well, like you could use something like password protected Padlets, for example, so that at least the information is not just floating around there, but you need to have a minimum like security clearance, if you want to put it that way, to get access to certain things. The worst thing you can do is just upload everything somewhere and anyone can access it. I mean, that is just not a viable strategy for things that might contain sensitive data. And I guess the next question you're going to ask me, what is sensitive data? It depends. Sensitive to who, right? But basically anything that could be used to identify a child, to identify, for example, learning difficulties that they might have, to identify age, or be used in some abusive way. All of that, as educators, we need to do better than even open a window to opportunities like that, in my opinion. Okay, now you might agree with that. If you're a head of school and you think this is all too complicated, it doesn't mean that you're right and I'm wrong. It just means that we need to...
That you're prioritizing something different and you're giving your time.
Prioritizing something different. But then let's be honest what you're prioritizing. It might not be child welfare, because if it is child welfare, then there's very little room in the discussion about what should we be sharing.
Right.
As little as possible is the only right answer. Now, if you want to promote your school, there are many great ways to do that without exposing student data. I mean, smiling children are a great resource. right? But they're not the only resource. I mean, we live in an age where, for example, AI-generated imagery is becoming more and more accessible.
Right.
You really need to post a real child, laughing and smiling to highlight the fact that your school produces happy and smiling kids. Maybe not. Think of it. So maybe in a nutshell, separate your thinking from thinking about your students as assets in your marketing campaign. If I can put that
yes, just like when we
right?
were talking about sharenting and monetizing your own children, and okay,
Children
and
are not
so
assets to be used.
well, I guess what I'm getting from this conversation, Klaus, is that that teachers, they don't need to be like tech experts to be data conscious. And that there can just be very small shifts in their awareness. They can maybe think more about the details that they might add, things that could somehow reverberate in cyberspace, and just learn, just having very open conversations also with our students about this. You might be the only adult that has a meaningful conversation with them about it, and not just like grandma saying, back in my day, we didn't have these things. Okay, that just doesn't really stick. But adults, as you said, who are modeling what it means to navigate through these trepid waters full of icebergs. And I think that it's something that we're really, we've got a totally different consciousness than we did back, like I said, when I was sharing me packing for my trips to the US, and now we're in a very different environment. And when I spoke with Virl in my last interview, where Virl was talking a lot about being, the EU AI Act and what it meant to be compliant, and what she was really trying to help teachers understand is that we actually need to know about these tools. We can no longer say, oh, well, I don't know anything about that stuff, or I'm not very tech savvy. And now it's part of our job.
Yeah,
and so
exactly. You cannot abdicate the responsibility for becoming informed just because tech is not your thing. Because you live in a world where tech is everything, or is most of the world. So you cannot just stick your head in the sand and say like, oh, but I didn't know. You must know. And
very well put.
Yeah, you must basically take on the responsibility. Or you simply say, well, I don't know enough about this stuff, so I'm not going to use it. But you cannot have it both ways. You cannot not want to learn and then also still want to use the tools that may lead to outcomes you don't anticipate. So,
and another thing they could do, they could come to Malta, they could launch courses, they could learn about that, and then feel a lot more confident in working with some of these things. Well, Klaus, I want to thank you so much for being with me today and for sharing your expertise and really helping enlighten us, and certainly opening my eyes to some things that I hadn't really thought about. And I think I'm going to go delete a few things. So I literally woke up in the middle of the night the other night and realized something that I'd done that I'm not going to say what it was.
Years ago.
No, it was actually not that long ago, but it had to do with an important event, and it had to do with the date, and it had, so.
Yeah, once you open that Pandora's box where you realize that anything you post could be valuable to somebody, that's oftentimes enough to understand that it's shifting.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much, sir. And I hope to see you in person in Florence one of these days. Have a wonderful evening.
You too. All the best.
Take care.
Bye.